Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. People could get hurt or killed. You could get arrested, incur huge legal expenses, or even lose your job. If you think drunk driving is no big deal, you couldn't be more wrong. Drive sober or get pulled over. Learn more at nhtsa.gov.
I need support staff to clear the room.
Stand up and walk. Now.
Hello, and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me in the studio is nobody. Yeah, no Andy this week. He's down in New Mexico making Briar Patch. We're all, he doesn't need us to cheer for him. He's got plenty of people working on that show. But send him your love. Hit us up on the Watch Facebook group, and pass along your well wishes to Andy as he embarks on this incredible creative endeavor. On today's show, I was joined by Sean Fennessey and David Shoemaker. Shoemaker dropped by to talk about the second season of Ozark, which, if you're listening to us on a Thursday night, is out. It's out on August 31st. Obviously, a very, very special show to me. And the second season, I've watched one episode so far, is definitely an extension of the first season, both in terms of the narrative, but in terms of the quality of the show as well. Sean came by to talk a little bit about an idea I had for superhero movies based on some of the news coming out of Todd Phillips's Joker movie that he was trying to make, or he is trying to make. And then we also talked a little bit about the early reactions to some of the Oscar favorites this year, like Damien Chazelle's First Man and Jason Reitman's Frontrunner and Alfonso Cuarón's Roma. So cool conversation, superhero movies, awards season, and Ozark season 2. Before I get to Sean, I just wanted to say one quick thing about Better Call Saul from this week. Just a quick note about the fourth episode. One thing that I really noticed about how elite this show is you can judge great shows by their bad episodes. And I don't by any means think that the fourth episode was bad, but it was probably a down. It was kind of like we're going around a bend and we're kind of taking our foot off the gas a little bit. And maybe it's a bridge to the second half of the season. But even within that down episode, I thought that there was so much to take away. Obviously, it was a really violent one with the sort of shootouts that were going on. But I thought it was a really fascinating episode about especially Kim and Jimmy's relationship. And it was communicated with very little acting whatsoever, or very, very little dialogue whatsoever. But essentially, you have Kim and Jimmy having that interaction in the bathroom. And she's asking him essentially to be a better person. She asks him to go see a therapist to deal with maybe some of the grief that he theoretically should be feeling about his brother's passing. And she can tell that he's running a game on her. I think she can tell. That's not explicitly exchanged. And he feels the need, he's obviously lying to her about, at least in the moment, about his intentions for the day about getting a job. And he says he's already gotten one where, in fact, he had turned that job down, and it was part of this kind of seduction and rejection game that he had been running on these various cell phone stores in the Albuquerque area. But there's that moment where I think she recognizes that he's running a game, or at least that there's something off about this guy. And I don't know whether that is specifically what prompts her to go trolling for public defender work in the courts. But clearly she is trying to, I don't know, maybe be a sin eater or atone for something that she feels is off in the universe via her relationship with Jimmy. And I thought that the way that was communicated, just the writing was incredible. So great episode of Better Call Saul. We're going to keep talking about that as the weeks go by. Have a great Labor Day weekend. No show on Monday. Next week, we'll have Summer TV Awards with Allison Herman and some other Ringer folks. So stay tuned for that. So let's get into my conversation with Sean Fennessey about award season and superhero movies. And then we're going to talk to David Shoemaker about Ozark Season 2. All right, I'm joined by my amigo, Sean Fennessey. What's up, man?
Yo, brother, what's up?
Big picture Sean Fennessey, The Ringer's Sean Fennessey. I have you here because I want to talk about two things.
Okay.
Player's choice. You want to start with superheroes, or you want to start with awards movies?
I want to dispel the notion that I don't like superhero movies, because I do, so let's go superheroes.
Okay. Because it's political season, it's a very politically charged time, I had an idea.
Okay.
And I'm being flippant, but I don't mean to make fun of political ideology at all. I'm actually being somewhat serious here. Should we nationalize superhero movies?
I don't know what that means.
I was thinking about this with the Joker and how this is another movie that seems to be getting screwed up in its infancy by the inability of a corporation to decide like what their vision is for a piece of intellectual property. So right now, Warner Brothers, by all accounts with Aquaman, is starting at like phase 1 of MCU with like the tone that they're shooting for. And they've still got a lot of the Justice League characters kind of in production. They've got Wonder Woman 84 coming next year, which seems delightful, but probably is going to be another offshoot of what these last 5 years of dark, gloomy Zack Snyder stuff was. And then there's the Batman movie, which may or may never happen, at least with Ben Affleck, who's currently in rehab.
So what you're pitching is along the lines of Bill Simmons' famous sports czar role, but for comic book movies.
Basically what I'm saying is this will never happen, but would it be better if we took comic book movies and basically made them like folk tales, and that they were outside of like Warner Brothers or Disney being able to decide what was the vision of these characters, or they had to fit together in these pieces, and they turned over maybe more. I would allow it, say, like for a producer. So Kevin Feige goes independent and runs MCU, but can sell those movies to a corporation that maybe is not going to say, hey, it needs to be a little lighter here. Don't shoot it so weird or whatever. Marvel movies are a bad example because they're relatively stable. But I was thinking about this Joker movie, and I was thinking about like the weird casting, Alec Baldwin being in the movie, out of the movie. Todd Phillips is trying to make this 80s crime movie that's supposed to have nods to like King of Comedy. I don't know. You see what I'm saying here?
I do. I don't think it's not necessarily nationalizing it. I think actually DC's big picture idea is the right one, which is that not every superhero movie has to be part of this constellation of interconnected stars. Sometimes you can have a standalone movie and it can be good.
Yeah.
The problem is people who are making DC movies don't know what they're doing. And there's been a lot of a lot of shuffling going on at the top of that company over time. The people who have been in charge of DC products have shifted in and out. And so you don't have a cohesive vision. Now, Kevin Feige has a cohesive vision, not just in terms of how, say, Captain America 2 will influence Avengers 4, but also in the tone, the style, the execution. So it's both homogenous, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now we have Aquaman and Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman 84 and Todd Phillips' Joker movie.
Which doesn't have anything to do with these other Batman movies that they've already got going.
Yes. And now we know Matt Reeves is working on a detective-style Batman movie. We know that Jared Leto also is committed to a Joker movie of his own. We know that Margot Robbie is going to appear in Birds of Prey, which is a standalone Harley Quinn movie. So it's confusing for the audiences because we've come to learn over the last 15 years that these stories have to fit together. If you want to bust that up, I'm all for it. You just have to make good movies.
Yeah.
And I haven't been able to do that yet.
Yeah.
Now, Todd Phillips has made some good movies, so maybe this could be good.
I just think it's probably what it is that there's like this promise that these things could be good. There's this promise that Danny Boyle's going to direct Bond, and there's this promise that, Lord and Miller have this irreverent take on Han Solo. And it's not that I necessarily think those are the right takes, but there seems to be this huge component of teasing movie fans with this information and with these possibilities before they eventually make something that I'd say 48% of the time is kind of a garbled concoction of notes, the needs of the star, and the ultimate kind of like end result of a weird equation that winds up being Spectre, or winds up being what Han Solo was.
I think one of the problems that we face is a term coined by our friend Sam Donsky, director bullshit. And director bullshit has infiltrated superhero movies more than any other category. And so the minute we heard about this Todd Phillips Joker movie, it was like, this is like the King of Comedy. That's like, what the fuck does the Joker have to do with the King of Comedy? Now, obviously you can draw conclusions, but a better platform, a better sort of way of thinking about this, I think, is what Taika Waititi did with Ragnarok. Yeah. Which is Thor is a character that isn't really that interesting, that people haven't had a serious relationship with in the movies, but he is an interesting palette to build on. Yeah. And what he did is he brought not somebody else's style or like a movie that was made in 1973. This isn't like, what if Thor was like Bullet, or what if Thor was like The French Connection? It's like, what if Thor was a Taika Waititi movie? Yeah.
What if Bob Raffleson did Thor?
Yeah. We don't need to say stuff like that. It's okay for Taika, who has this irreverent, fun, loose, chatty, kind of goofball candy-colored aesthetic.
Yeah.
And you inserted that into the Marvel Universe. That is a much better way to think about making these movies. So if Todd Phillips is like, I'm going to make the Joker movie and it's going to be kind of like Borat and The Hangover, you'd be like, okay, so he's making a Todd Phillips movie, as opposed to trying to ape something that he'll never be able to achieve. And we went through this with like Winter Soldier being the parallax view.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was just
the
not the
Russos
case.
are good at this. I guess the reason why I was thinking about any of this was because of this Ethan Hawke interview, which has become one of the most strangely viral gift-giving interviews. Now, our buddy Zach Barron obviously did a piece on him in GQ, which was a fantastic interview. This wasn't out of that interview. This was out of...
there was also a New York Times Magazine
Yeah.
interview with Ethan Hawke. He's obviously been on a podcast run of late. But this was an interview with the Film Stage,
Right.
a long conversation about movies. And this was right at the end of that conversation. And he said something very straightforward, which is, I keep being told that superhero movies are good, especially movies like Logan. I saw Logan. It's fine.
Yeah.
But it's not Ingmar Bergman and it's not Robert Bresson and it's not truly great cinema. And the nerds got mad and also cineasts got mad, and it seemed to be this conflagration of feelings.
Yeah, well, I think that it does actually bring up a lot of really interesting ideas, because I think when you and I were maybe in our early 20s, we were kind of more in the mindset. I mean, we obviously love mainstream movies, but there was a little bit more of a separation of church and state between art house and blockbuster. And I think that started to break down, especially as like in the late 90s and early aughts, you started to see these action movies that were starring like John Malkovich and Steve Buscemi. But I think I understand what he's saying. He's a guy who grew up probably loving Godard and Bresson movies, and he's in these Richard Linklater movies, and he thinks he's out there making his version of late 70s American cinema. And then it turns out he needs to be in The Purge to put his kids through college, as he told Zach, you know what I mean? And I think that that's fascinating. What was weird was that I didn't expect there to be, I didn't think anybody would be like, you're offending me by somehow negating Logan's artistic value. We're a year and a half away from when Logan came out. I think we're all comfortable with where we rate Logan.
Yeah, I like the way that you talked about this when we talked about it a couple of days ago when the story was first breaking, which is like, it's completely fine to have both.
Yeah.
It's completely fine to say, I subscribe to Filmstruck and I'm making my way through Ozu films and that's my happy place. And it's also okay to say, in addition to that, I'm a big fan of the movie Logan, which
Yeah.
I thought was cool. It's an obsession with, and we are absolutely a part of this at The Ringer, canonization, where things sit in the firmament, what matters and doesn't matter. And there's a media economy thing going on where every time somebody says something that is sweeping, that runs against the grain or defies an expectation of a certain level of fandom, somebody has to come in and fight back for their fandom. And fandom has so infiltrated the way that we watch movies that to defy Ethan Hawke is to defend Wolverine. And like, I don't know that like Wolverine needs defending in the same way that I don't think Ethan Hawke needs defending. It's like, go see First Reformed and go see Logan. They're both good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe it's that I think that it might be that I'm more surprised that I think what Ethan Hawke is actually ultimately reacting against is a deep-seated fear that I think a lot of people have, is that the more that we basically normalize like superhero popular culture, the more that the things that he cares about, like the kind of human dramas, are just going to be marginalized more and more. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that those movies just need to be better, because I watch a lot of them still.
Yeah, they still make a lot. They make less, and we talk about this anxiety over and over again, but it's not that much different from there being this wild rash of Westerns in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, out of that time, you get incredible John Ford films, you get this Bud Boddicker stuff, like you get tons of great movies, but you also get a lot of shit.
Yeah.
You get a lot of bad stuff. It's the same thing in the horror genre. In the 50s, you get the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you get the Universal films and Val Lewton films, but you also get really bad, schlocky, William Castle style exploitation stuff. Every genre and every frame and every generation has good stuff and bad stuff, and mostly everything's kind of in the middle. And Logan is like on the higher end of the middle. And I don't think that by saying Logan is a meaningful movie or even giving it an Academy Award nomination necessarily denigrates the future of cinema. That's the anxiety that people are hitting on. It's just interesting that we live in a world now where Ethan Hawke can give an interview to a small outlet. That interview can go quasi-viral, and then 9 think pieces come out of it
it's
the
like,
next day.
when did Ethan Hawke become Kevin Durant?
Exactly.
I think one of the reasons why you and I are probably interested in this also is we lived through this with Poptimism. We lived through this with being music critics at a time when we basically felt the ground move under our feet from growing up and being like, Beck is a real artist because Beck writes and produces his songs, to no, Beck is the same as Backstreet Boys. Like, they both have musical value.
It's a perfect comparison.
Yeah.
And I was more of a Poptimist than you were.
Yes.
But I also never felt like you and I were in opposition when we would talk about music. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like, it's okay I was always, and you were too, you were like into Katy Perry.
For sure,
We thought
yeah.
Katy Perry was a good artist. That didn't change the fact that we were also really into Pavement.
Yeah.
You can have both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on how you grew up, where you were like, I mean, I'm still a child of the 90s that was like, having your music in a commercial is actually morally indefensible.
So that actually is over.
Yes.
That version
Yes.
of things, that concept of selling out is gone.
Absolutely. You briefly talked about the high end of the middle there a second ago. Let's talk about Jason Reitman.
Yeah, let's go.
Because he is one of the few purveyors of
He makes the movies we're talking
Exactly.
about. He makes Hollywood dramas.
And we talked about Tully on the Big Picture for the Summer Movie Awards, and Jason Reitman, I always love it when this happens, has a second movie coming out this year. It's The Frontrunner, and its trailer just came out on Thursday, and it kind of caps a week where we've gotten our first reactions to a couple of pretty obvious Oscar contenders in First Man and Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, which were both playing in Venice.
That's right.
Both premiered in Venice. And then Frontrunner, which looks like Spotlight meets, take your pick, political...
All the President's Men,
Yeah,
whatever.
All the President's Men, movie stars. It has that kind of late 90s Sorkin-y tone of really well done dialogue by great actors, J.K. Simmons, Vera Farmiga, Hugh Jackman plays Gary Hart, a bunch of people that you'll just recognize from HBO shows and everything else. I kind of wonder whether or not this movie is being catapulted into a time that it can't control.
Yes.
I think it wants to say some things about our current political climate, but I almost wonder whether our current political climate is so perverted that Gary Hart seems like it happened 300 years ago.
So a little backstory on this movie. It's essentially based on a lot of the reporting and writing that Matt Bai, the New York Times Magazine and Yahoo's political writer, did. And Matt profiled Hart, I think maybe 5 years ago for the magazine. And it was sort of like, where is Gary Hart now? And he used the Gary Hart story, which is about a politician who was thought to be the frontrunner for the presidential nomination for the Democrats in 1988. And he had an extramarital affair. And the extramarital affair became the thing that sort of undid his candidacy. And I hope I'm not spoiling the movie for anybody who's looking forward to it.
Pretty explicit in the trailer.
It's very recent history. And the story that Matt wrote essentially uses him as patient zero for everything that would happen with Clinton, everything that would happen with the sort of seediness, the sewer quality that started to infect political reporting. That all the things that in the days of, I don't know, John F. Kennedy were thought to be unsaid among the political class of reporters started to come to the surface. So Gary Hart is the first time somebody's like, this guy's sleeping around and America needs to know. And if one paper reports on it, then the rest of the world has to report on it. It's a very interesting concept. It's very subtle, though. And in a time of loud, angry, emotional political discourse, a movie that is trying to say like, hey, this is the first time something happened and a guy slept with another woman, people are not really going to be clutching their pearls about that.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if the emotional stakes will actually feel quite a bit lower. And will it just not feel like, for lack of a better phrase, the movie we need right now? Like, that actually might hold it back.
We're talking about the same thing. It's kind of interesting. We are talking about the same thing again. I think that this year I've noticed more and more this erosion, not out of, and I don't feel nostalgic or romantic or I'm not missing it, but an erosion of the center, right? So an erosion of just a movie that's good with good actors, that makes you feel good, but also makes you think. And in the same way, I think that we're going to start we see extremes happening in our political sphere. You know, you wonder whether or not you're going to start seeing more extreme political art in a certain way, or at least that's what people gravitate towards. That people are going to be like, I like something that's all the way pop or all the way, complex. Now, this Oscar season, you get the impression that we're going to see a couple of movies that are like the old school Hollywood does it better than anybody else. First Man, Star is Born, and Frontrunner kind of movies. But I wonder whether or not those films will do well commercially.
I don't know. It's really hard to say. It's funny. I've been thinking about and watching the movies of Hal Ashby lately.
Mm-hmm.
There's a documentary about Hal Ashby coming out next week. And the thing that you've
What's it called?
learned, it's called Hal.
Okay.
I would highly recommend it if anybody's not familiar with Hal Ashby. He made Harold and Maude, Coming Home, The Last Detail, Being There. Just an astonishing run of movies in the 70s. And Hal Ashby's movies, and it didn't totally occur to me until I saw this movie and started rewatching his work, is infused with heavy socio-political themes. But the movies are about very small, individuated people who are not political people.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are in the Navy. There's a young man and an older woman who fall in love. There's a gardener who essentially becomes a celebrity. But the ideas in those movies are completely influenced by the times. And Shampoo is one of his most famous movies. There are several, almost dozens of shots of Richard Nixon and Watergate in the background of every scene in Shampoo. But the movie is not about Watergate.
Yeah.
And so what I'm kind of waiting for is not a movie like The Frontrunner, which is going to say, put its finger on its nose and say, this is a movie for our times, but movies that are influenced by what's happening in the world without being overt. I don't know if we live in a society anymore where that kind of artistic subtlety works.
Absolutely. And when I was seeing the first few reactions to First Man, the ones that made me really want to see it are the ones that are basically like, this is to space what Saving Private Ryan was to war. I mean, we're never going to think about this the same way again afterwards. The part that made my eyebrow cock was when there was like a true testament to the courage of men who pushed further than we ever could have dreamed. I just think that there's going to be like a kind of tacit rejection of that kind of myth making.
I completely agree.
And I'll be curious to see how it's received. And I almost feel bad for Chazelle because I feel like his movies don't get judged on their own terms, really. Since Whiplash, I think La La Land obviously got put into a binary with Moonlight and also was just kind of like on the track for way too long and just everybody got their shot at it. And I can't wait to see First Man, but I have a feeling like there's going to be some stuff about that.
I think he's a sincere and emotional filmmaker, but his greatest identifier, and I've said this since I saw Whiplash, is he's a master technician. Mm-hmm. He's an incredible creator of movies, of like physical and emotional tension in movies. And sometimes maybe the dialogue isn't what you want it to be, or even the bigger idea of the movie isn't exactly what you want it to be. But the feeling that he gives you when you're watching the movie is unlike almost anybody that is working. So on those terms, I haven't seen First Man. I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, he's following the Nolan track of I'm going to keep getting bigger and bigger with my ideas. And that's to be appreciated, I think, especially since he'll probably be directing Wonder Woman 92 next.
Most definitely. I wonder, though, how... I mean, we're going to wait to see as Oscar season approaches. I'm sure we'll talk about this again, whether it's a political Oscars at all. I mean, the movies that are going to be released right into the midterms, there's going to be a lot of people making a lot of effort to say, this means this, and this doesn't mean this. A Star is Born doesn't really feel like a terribly political movie to me. Roma, I think, is going to be a movie about home and an experience. It's not going to be a movie about, will Florida go blue?
Sure. I guess we'll have to see. I will definitely keep having this conversation. All right. Thank you to Sean so much for joining me. Next up is my conversation with David Shoemaker about Ozark. Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by the new Showtime original series Kidding, starring Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey and directed by Michelle Gondry. Carrey plays Jeff Pickles, a children's television icon and a force for good in an often cruel world. As his family life starts to unravel, Jeff's sanity is put to the ultimate test. Will he be able to keep it together? Catch the series premiere of Kidding Sunday, September 9th at 10 p.m. following the season premiere of Shameless, only on Showtime. Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by Greats. Greats is Brooklyn's first sneaker company crafting quality, purpose-built footwear. Greats was founded on the idea of building a better sneaker for less. They offer classically inspired styles for both men and women in full and half sizes. Greats sells direct to consumer, so you get high-quality product at a value price, and their best sellers include the all-leather Royale lace-up and the Wooster slip-on. Greats are built using luxury, high-quality materials and premium construction. You can check out Greats online at greats.com or visit them in person in New York, Venice Beach, and select Nordstrom stores across America. Greats offers free shipping on orders of $75 and a simple exchange process if you need a different size. Need help? Greats support team is available 7 days a week. Greats has been featured in GQ, Vogue, Esquire, and their shoes have hundreds of 5-star reviews from shoppers. Forbes even described Greats as the next great footwear company. I have a pair of Greats, the Royale Perforated. They're great for actually, a black jeans and going out to dinner at night, or just hanging out around the house, going to run errands. They're just a quick day-to-night transition. I don't really have a lot of day-to-night pieces, but my Great sneakers are. And they're excellent if you're looking for something to walk around the city in or something to snazz it up a little bit. So it's just like, what else do you need from a sneaker? Get your pair today at greats.com and save 15% on your first purchase with our code WATCH. That's greats.com and code WATCH to save 15%. All right, joining me to talk about a show that's very near and dear to my heart, Ozark on Netflix, which starts its second season Thursday at midnight if you're a night owl, or Friday, which when most people will probably click it on, is David Shoemaker, co-host of the Press Box, Masked Man show. And Shoemaker was nice enough to join me because he, like we just love washing our money in this big Ozark lake. Shoemaker, what's up?
Oh man, I am so excited for this show. I can't even tell you. This was like, there's sometimes when you're working for The Ringer and you feel like, you might not be in the same boat, but I feel like I get out on shows because everybody around me is so in on them so quickly. And this was whatever the opposite of that was. I was just sitting here screaming about Ozark on work Slack every couple of days. You were doing the same thing. Jason Gallagher, I think, was doing the same thing, but there wasn't a whole. This just feels like a show everybody should love, and I'm so excited that it's back.
Yeah, the money team, if I remember correctly, of the original early adopters of Ozark at The Ringer were you, me, Gallagher, O'Hanlon's mom, and Sean Yu. And Kaya now is in. We've got our converts. It turns out that just being wild-eyed on the streets and pressing this pamphlet into people's hands, it does work eventually. I wanted to just talk a little bit about why we like this show, because I think it's one of those strange TV shows that it just really depends on where you're standing in front of the painting, and you can see a lot of different things. And I think a lot of people will kind of look at me and be like, "Why do you like this so much?" And I think a really easy way to start the conversation is it just feels like a domestic version of 24 in some ways. It has that level of tension. It produces those levels of anxiety in that almost getting high way where you're like, I kind of need this. I need to have my heartbeat raised over the course of an hour watching these people try to dig their way out of hell. And I think that is part of the appeal, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. Why do you love it so much?
It's funny you were talking about all the people who initially liked it and now the people who like it again. I think there's something going on with the way that we watch TV now, especially prestige TV broadly defined, that you just kind of need one little reason to watch something, and then if enough other people are watching it and if it's well enough made, which it almost always is, then you're just in. And there's a lot of little reasons why people would like this show, right? The cast is incredible. You could come in as a Bateman fan or a Laura Linney fan or, I guess a Julia Garner fan if you're deep into all the different things she's done over the past 5 years, and really just love the show for, whatever. But I love the vibe. I love the ambiance. I love the setting. I'm a diehard Daniel Woodrell fan, the novelist who wrote Winter's Bone.
Of course, yeah.
The
Bayou trilogy,
more integrally the Bayou trilogy. The Bayou trilogy, by the way, is for anyone who wants to walk up to me in an imaginary land and ask me for a book recommendation. I always say the Bayou trilogy because no one's ever not liked it.
All right, yeah, that's call that the Triple Down Book Club. It's the Shoemaker version.
I know there's been a lot of talk, especially recently, about how Netflix these short series are made. I feel like all the episodes are made really well. I feel like the crime element is it's so hammy, but it's spot on. The how to launder your money thing is just a nice little, it's like a mystery box, not a mystery box, but it's a riddle, you're just it's interesting to see all the ways that he figures out to get through all this. Every character is interesting and good. I don't know. I just think it's not great television, but it's it is B+ television across the board in a way that's hard to fathom.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different layers to this show too, right? I think that there is the initial noir it's tongue-in-cheek noir, so it's noir told by characters who are almost self-aware that they're inside of a noir story, and that was where Bateman's performance kind of comes into play because he's such a wisecracking smartass, and I don't think he could possibly resist playing the part that way, but because he seems to be almost aware of the story his character is in while he's performing it, that makes up for the fact that there isn't necessarily an audience avatar, because typically what the audience avatar would be is someone who is new to this circumstances and is guiding us through this underworld. And it's something that I've been kind of obsessed with in the last few months, because I think I started thinking about it in regards to Sicario, the second Sicario film, because they removed the Emily Blunt character that was supposed to be our guide through this world. And I think that Ozark is supposed to be, the family is supposed to be the audience avatar. But they've kind of changed that, because what they've taken is this show shows how survival and ambition can often look like the same thing. And that's the coolest thing about what's happening with this family, is that everything that they tell their kids and everything that they kind of superficially tell themselves is that they're doing this just to keep their head above the water, that they're doing this just to survive, that if they were to do the alternative, that the cartels would kill them or the Snells would kill them. But in truth, I think that this is a guy who kind of found himself at the point in his life that Walter White eventually finds himself, where he was like, I did it for me. And I think that the fact that this show starts with Marty Byrde watching a videotape of his wife cheating on him is probably crucial to his psychology, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that rewatching the show, I think it was more apparent to me than on the first watch how, there's a lot of very Netflixy elements of the show, but one of them is the cast. How, like, every single person who appears on screen has previously been in something else and is easily Googleable, and you kind of bring different, the cast is all, hey, I know that guy, or hey, I know
Peter
that
Mullen,
lady.
Julia Garner, obviously, Jordana Spiro, Harris Yulin,
And Bateman in particular, it's intriguing that they signed him up for this show right on the heels of Arrested Development. So all that is to say that, like, there is a computer brain in the Netflix office that's like, people like Jason Bateman, we'll put him in the Ozarks, we'll see how it goes. And there are some moments, I think my least favorite moments of the show are when he's being overly comical. Because it just feels a lot like Arrested Development. But the flip side of that is he has an incredible range that he shows in the show that's sort of breathtaking in its own right. But even just putting Jason Bateman as we think of him in this situation, in the darker moments, is really just something to watch. And there's a little bit of like Long Goodbye in it. There's like just having him play into that Walter Whitey character with like you said, I think is really interesting. And I think that there's a real lesson that they learned, going back to what you were saying, from Breaking Bad, where like the audience stand-ins or just the heroes that they thought they were creating in Breaking Bad turned out to not be the ones that the audience liked, right? I mean, they
thought Skyler would be the audience avatar.
Right, and the audience never reacts the way you do. And in this case, it's a little bit of like well, in some ways, the acting, it should be said, as somebody who's from the South, who loves Southern film, Southern fiction all the time. I mean, this is a fantasy land. This is Southern Gothic in the most sort of insulting way, but it's wonderful at the same time. It has a little bit of that. What was the Showtime show that you and Andy always saw? Oh, Banshee, which was like really good, but was just not set in a real place at all. I mean, there's like no continuity between dialect and even like, backgrounds.
No, that was more of a comic book. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some of that in this too. I mean, this is really just like everybody like can you do a Southern accent? Okay, don't even try in front of me. Just go do it on screen. You know what I mean? And that's really great. But in some ways, that makes watching Peter Mullen just go out there and just chew scenery so much more amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and the same thing for Julia Garner, who's just I think probably done 10 Southern accents in her career, even though she's not Southern. It's all just sort of a stage show, I mean, it's just really cool. All of that is to say that like there are things to fall in love with in every moment of the show. I don't think you need an audience avatar, because I think you're right. I mean, Jason Bateman tries really, really hard to be unlikable, throughout the first season, and he more or less succeeds, but it's hard not to love that guy.
Yeah, I think I like to think of this show as basically the Coke Zero of prestige TV. It's got a lot of the hallmarks that we would expect. It's got a certain, dark texture to the cinematography. I think it's shot really well. I think all the performances are uniformly very good. But what it strips out is our traditional understanding of what you need to develop and build up. And Andy and I have often talked about the pilot episode, the first episode, and how it essentially goes from season 1 to season 3 of Breaking Bad in 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of the genius of the show, is if you keep pushing the pedal down, you won't run into bloodline problems, which is essentially a really interesting setting, really good performance, and a cool idea for a show that then slams the brakes to do all atmosphere and all like smoking and staring out of a window, essentially all the middle parts of sharp objects. And I think that that's what this show kind of gets right, is that people sort of want the propulsive nature of it, and they don't. There is anxiety in this show, but there is also the question of whether or not the main character in the show might be a psychopath. He might be someone who actually is continuously putting his family's life on the line because of the thrill he gets from becoming a power player in this shady underworld.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious to know what your expectations or nervousness or worries are about it.
It's so hard to tell. With every Netflix show that doesn't involve a superhero, and even the ones that do, it's hard. It's hard to tell what lessons they would have learned if they stay true to the course, and just let it be about, this. If it's the same feel, the same writing, and obviously most of the same cast, I think that it could really work. I think my fear would be that it actually goes down the Breaking Bad path, and I love Breaking Bad top to bottom. But when you like zoom out or rewatch it, it's like sort of the same problem over and over again, with just like the villain getting bigger and like the boss getting bigger and badder every time. I don't need to see a bigger Ozark mob boss roll onto the scene. I don't need to see a bigger villain. Partly because a lot of the characters that they've developed are so great. And partly because, the show itself is the villain, sort of, and I think Jason Bateman obviously takes on some of that role. It doesn't need to continue to be a battle. It can just sort of be a puzzle. That would be my hope, I guess. But I would say that from the moment I turned on the show, I love Jason Bateman. I love Laura Linney. I thought that's kind of a weird couple. It took me like half an episode to get into it, but they might have, in a weird way, the most functional relationship in television, where like she's like screaming. She's like literally spent the day screaming at a guy in the grocery store about ice cream or whatever, and he walks in and she's just like, "Don't effing talk to me right now." And he's just like, "Our son is having actually a problem that I think that we need to discuss." And then it's just like quick cut to them having a very reasonable conversation about it. I don't know. There was like, for everything that's going on all the way up until the very last scene of the show, of season 1, I just love watching them interact. It's just fantastic stuff.
Yeah, they're definitely like a very post-couples therapy couple. They have all the vocabulary of how they're supposed to fix this relationship, yet they are fundamentally engaged in something that is immoral. So it's hard because there's just this thing in the center. And the thing that I liked, I watched the first episode of the second season, and it's essentially an extension of the first season. It starts moments after the first season ends. One thing that I think is going to be very exciting about this season is that, in the same way I was mentioning that survival and ambition are kind of the same thing, it feels like this season will be Wendy will get as much involved in the growing of the family business in a way that suits her, particularly in her political background and how she kind of really thrived as a political operator when they were living back in Chicago. And it's fascinating to watch that be a direction the show is going. Also, it's just, they've essentially put Marty in the middle of a triangle of like criminal elements, from the Snells to the Langmores to the cartel. And there are representatives from all those places. They all want what he has. They all want him to keep doing what he's doing. And then Marty has his own ambition. So they've definitely figured out a way to extend this a second season. I'm not like particularly worried about whether or not it gets a third season. I think it's a pretty popular show. It's just really about like how long can you sustain this. The one thing I think is cool is that I think in the second season they will pull back a little bit and show some of the surrounding geography of just, it's not just going to be the resort function of the lake. It's going to be Kansas City and people going to different cities and stuff like that. So it's a pretty cool element.
Yeah, I mean, I love the setting, but I don't think the show is necessarily constrained by the setting, and that's just like, zooming out or even just pulling up stakes and leaving all together at some point in the future. So I'm very excited. I mean, I think that I'm glad that we have a chance to talk about this. I'm glad that I in particular have a chance to talk about this. I think like when I pushed play on that show for the first time, I was immediately wrapped, and I've tried to convert people, over the course of the last year, but it's just fun and good.
Yeah.
And I really hope that people, like, I think that even the people who are most vocally support it, like you and me, find ourselves tripping over the qualifications.
Yeah, there's all these caveats. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't like if you're not a fan of this show, then maybe not, or like if you don't like Jason Bateman's sense of humor, or like I don't know who that person is, but like maybe not, or like if you don't like whatever. I just think that everybody likes the show. Everybody should watch the show. It's really, really good, and it's like forget the caveats. It's just awesome.
Yeah, I think that really good shows, even if they're not entirely successful creatively, but good shows, which I think is different, create their own sort of rules and realities. We've said this before on the pod where we're talking about like shows teach you how to watch them, but that's become like a recurring trope in criticism these days. Is just like once you find a show that you like, you realize I now know how to watch Amy Adams drive around drunk. I now know how to watch Wyatt Russell lying on a bench eating a donut. Like, you kind of have to fall into the rhythms of a show. And some shows never find that rhythm, and some shows give you the rhythm, but then you're like, I don't really care about the song in the first place. And I understand there's elements to that, but one thing I would say is that the one thing plaguing television is tempo and pace, and the over-reliance on signifiers of atmosphere and seriousness rather than efficiency of storytelling. And that is not something that Ozark suffers from. Ozark definitely is a propulsive, almost, nail-biting pace, even though it's essentially about accounting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, the framing of every episode is really well done. And you're right, the pace of the show, I mean, I mentioned some of this stuff earlier, but like, I don't know if it's the acting performances or just the sheer writing. They can make things like, I mean, the way that everything ties together so neatly. No one cares about the ice cream, but you care about Laura Linney, and then you care about the dead animals, and then when you find out why they're there, it's just like, I mean, the whole like everything is just so beautifully knotted together, and it's like it is like, I mean, I mentioned Daniel Woodrow was writing, really high level crime fiction when he was writing mostly about the Ozarks, but it really is just like a really beautifully written crime novel in a lot of ways, because it brings you into a world you didn't know about, and I don't just mean the Ozarks, I mean like the accounting world too, and it just like kind of gives you that moment of satisfaction on every page where you're just like, oh, that was a cool trick they just did.
It's interesting too also how it shows these people are engaged in something for the express purpose of generating money. Like there's no offshoot of what they're doing that is charitable or philanthropic or for the betterment of society. But at the same time, as the more money they generate, the more money almost becomes this onerous thing that they have to carry around with them and get rid of and light on fire and shove in walls and put into, lockers. It's a really interesting look at how empty the entire enterprise is, I think. We'll definitely have to have Shoemaker on to talk about the second season in about a week or so. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dave.
Thanks for having me, man.
Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. People could get hurt or killed. You could get arrested, incur huge legal expenses, or even lose your job. If you think drunk driving is no big deal, you couldn't be more wrong. Drive sober or get pulled over. Learn more at nhtsa.gov. Today's episode of The Watch was brought to you by Showtime's wondrous new series, Kidding, starring Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey as Jeff Pickles, a kind man in a cruel world, trying to keep it together. Don't miss Kidding. Sundays at 10 p.m. beginning September 9th, only on Showtime.